In my previous episode, I created an ECS cluster using the ECS wizard. In this episode, we're going to take that ECS cluster and we're going to perform a rolling deployment to move from one version of our deployed service to another. So let's take a look. So let's first click on default to go into the ECS cluster. So what do I have in here right now? Well, I created a new custom Nginx service. It's a really simple service that has Nginx and it has a custom HTML file that I put on there. So what you should see when I hit my load balancer and go to the URL of test.html, you see welcome to Nginx version 1. I've got a separate one that hosts version 2 that's running in Docker Hub. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to roll from one to the other. So let's first take a look at what we've got in here. So I've got this custom Nginx service. I'm going to go ahead and click on it to show you what it's doing. So this service is using the task definition, custom Nginx task definition version 1. And it has a desire of 2 instances of its container running, and it's currently running 2. And it's all running as part of that default cluster. The default cluster itself, inside of its ECS instances, is running three AMI instances. So you can see each one of those here. And you can see that the system that I configured, the service that I configured, we're using 256 units of CPU. So that's why we're at 768 on the first 2, and then the third one doesn't have it. So we've got this extra server. And as you'll recall, I recommended that you have what I just said, n+1, so that you did have an extra server so that you can perform the rolling deployment. So let's take a look at the task definition. So my custom Nginx task definition, you can see version 1. And currently, it is using this image, this legato/nginx:1. And this is the image that I've created. And that's the one with this HTML file running inside of Nginx. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new revision and we're going to update it to number 2. So let's get started on that. From an existing task definition, we can just click on Create New Revision, and this is going to create a new copy of the existing one that we have. And now inside of here we can customize whatever it is that we want to do. So I'm going to open up this custom Nginx container that I have. And this container is using Legato Nginx version 1, and I'm going to say I want you to use version 2. So I'm creating this new task definition that will just use a different Docker image that we've got. I'll hit create, and then we will see what it did. So if I look at the JSON, I can get to the details of what it did. But then I can also jump back to this custom Nginx task definition, and I can see I have version 1 and version 2. And from what we just saw, the difference between the two is that we're running a different Docker container inside of each, so a new revision. So let's go ahead and start running the rolling deployment. So we perform rolling deployments by going into our ECS service. So let's jump into the cluster, go over to my service. So I've got custom Nginx service down here, and click on that. And I can see a task definition. So which task definition is it running? So I'm going to go ahead and hit update. And from here, I can give it whatever configuration I want. So this is the name of the service. But what I want to change here is I'm going to change this and say I want to run custom Nginx task definition version 2. Okay, and I'll leave everything else the same. And I'll just press update service. So the service has been updated. So now behind the scenes, what ECS is doing is it's going to start a new instance of this service or this Docker container on that third ECS instance that we have. Then it's going to decommission one, and then it will start a second instance because we required 2, and then finally decommission the last one. So it does this rolling deployment for us. So right now, if I'm hitting this, I'm probably going to get version 1, and I'll be getting that for a little while. But I can see if I look at actually going to the cluster, take a look at the ECS instances, I should see some stuff starting to happen here. So if you notice that we've got available CPU is at 768. If you remember before, we had 1024 on one of them. So we can see that we have actually started an instance of our ECS service, and it's going to go through that process of performing that rolling deployment. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here, and I'll resume in a minute once it's complete. So while you've been gone, our service has automatically rolled out a new version. One of the things I wanted to show you is I did capture directly on the machines at one point where one of the 3 machines was on version 2, one of them was on version 1, and the third one was on version 1. So this was the time when it had actually started this one prior to decommissioning the others. If we look at it through the load balancer now, we can see we're version 2, and as we can keep refreshing over and over and over again, it stays at version 2 because the rolling deployment has completed. So let's jump in here. So looking at this custom service, I'm going to look at the events so you can see everything that transpired. So we had 20 events that occurred as this went. So we knew at this point when it had reached a steady state, things were working well, and it was running those 2 instances with version 1. And then we can see it did a few things, like it deregistered one instance. It tried to start another one. So at first it tried to start and went, hey, I don't have an available port because another one's currently running. So it's going to drain the connections on it. It's going to shut it down. And so you see this pattern of registering a new instance and then deregistering an old one with the ELB, and so on, up until the point where it drains all the connections and enables the service to stop. And then at that point, we are now running the custom Nginx task definition version 2. The cool thing about this is there was nothing that we had to do in terms of starting and stopping servers. We just went into this service and we said we would like you to upgrade from version 1 to version 2, and ECS handled all of that for us. So what happens if we wanted to run and perform a rollback? Let's do that next. So we've upgraded to version 2, so we can see that that's running right here. But what if, oops, we've got a problem with version 2. What do we want to do? How do we get back to version 1? Well, as you might suspect, it is pretty darn simple. We can go back into our service and press update. And we just tell it, you know what, I want to use custom Nginx task definition version 1 instead of version 2, and hit update service. So now we wait a few minutes and it's going to go ahead and handle all that for us. So if you're interested, you can watch all of the events as they occur. So this time it looked a little more interesting. We had gotten to our steady state, and then it deregistered one instance from the ELB. If I refresh, we should start to see it doing things like draining connections and starting other ones. So I'm going to go ahead and pause, and I'll join you back here in a couple minutes, and we will see what it did. Okay, so the rollback has worked. We're up to 35 events. So you can see based off of the timestamps on here, this is where we were when we were running version 2. Then what did it do? So it started a new task, which was going to be an instance of the task running version 1 because we're rolling back. It deregistered one of the existing ones from the ELB. It tried to place it and went, oh no, there's actually one that's running, so what do I do with it? It starts draining all of its connections, and then it ends up stopping it. Meanwhile, it started the second one, deregistered one. So it goes to that pattern of start a new one, deregister an old one, and then drain the connection so that you can finally, again, arrive at this steady state. So if we look at this through the ELB, we are running on version 1, no matter how many times we refresh. We go to one of the servers and we see, okay, can't find it. It's actually down because we're only running 2 copies. I go back to one of the direct servers. There's version 1 and there's version 1. So we have effectively rolled back. So let's summarize. We had a cluster named default, and it's running 3 ECS instances. It was really important to us that we had 3 so that we were able to perform the rolling deployment. The strategy that ECS uses is if we look at these 3, we can see we've got 2 instances running. If we were to say that we wanted to run version 2 again, it would start one on this container, get it up and running so that it would have, at the minimum we have to have 2, so it would have 3 and be happy. Then it would pick one and it would decommission that one and then start a second instance, and then finally decommission the third instance so that you would end up with 2 ECS instances that were running the 2 correct versions of our service. The details of how we did it, if we look at our cluster, we go into our services and click on that service. The key was changing the task definition. So we changed the task definition by going into the service and pressing update and just choosing the one that we wanted. And the important thing that actually made them change was looking at the task definition themselves. So I had my custom Nginx task definition. I had 2 versions, and as we saw, version 1 was running the image legato Nginx :1, and version 2 was running legato Nginx version 2. So in conclusion there, by changing the task definition, ECS performed a rolling deployment for us, 0 downtime, everything worked, and we didn't really have to do a whole lot. So thank you, Amazon. So I will see you next time.